Good morning and thanks for joining us. As everyone knows, 2017 included major action on a landmark housing affordability package. So after years of false starts and some multi-year efforts to replace funding that was lost to create a new permanent source of funding for affordable housing, the legislature and the governor arrived at a deal that not only provided new subsidies for the development of affordable homes, but also included a variety of streamlining and new planning and permitting requirements. So CSAC is working to get you the best information on this implementation of this affordable housing package, and so we've set up two webinars. The first is today's, where we're going to be talking about the new opportunities for providing funding for affordable homes, and the second will be next week on December 14th, where we're going to be talking about the new obligations, the new planning, permitting, and analysis requirements that counties and cities are going to have to comply with as we move forward with implementation of the 2017 housing package. So today we're lucky to have with us Zach Olmstead from the Department of Housing and Community Development. As Jeff mentioned, he is the Deputy Director of Housing Policy at the department, and he previously served as the Assistant Deputy Director of Homeless and Housing Policy since 2016. Prior to joining HCD, Olmstead was the lead advisor on housing, homelessness, and land use policy to Speaker Emeritus of the California Assembly, Toni Atkins. He also fulfilled that same role during her tenure as Speaker of the Assembly from May 2014 through March 2016. Prior to that, he was the Director of Homeless Policy at Housing California from 2006 to 2013. Zach completed his undergraduate studies at the University of San Diego and holds a master's degree of public policy and administration from the California State University at Sacramento. Good morning, Zach, and we'll kick it off, I think, with your presentation.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to go through a little bit of presentation that we've been giving a couple times. Our director, Ben Metcalf, has given. I'll go through some of the things that you're going to get into your webinar next week very quickly, although we do have slides on a number of the bills that you'll be covering in your following webinar. And then certainly leave a lot of time for questions, because I know there may be many. So just a little bit of setting the stage, and these all come from research that we've done at the state a while back. We are really deficient in what we need to produce annually, right? So this is a nice graph which shows what we used to produce versus what we are producing now, and so, you know, obviously this is, you know, a crisis that has been in the making for a long time, and as Chris mentioned, you know, prompted, you know, a pretty significant package of bills this year. So, you know, and then I think another further reason for kind of the crisis we are in is if you look at this chart on rent versus renter income, you see significantly just the gap widening and increasing over time, right? Significant increases in rent, and we are still actually below, adjusted for kind of inflation and other factors, what renter income was from the beginning of this century. And so you see even that further exacerbating some of the challenges that we're having. So you know, another way to look at this, 1.5 million households now are what we'd call, in their worst case, housing needs situations. They're paying more than half of their income in rent or mortgage, and that is a number that is going up. It is up almost a third from just a decade ago, and you know, just another kind of data point for what precipitated the change here. Finally, probably no surprise to any of you on this webinar, this slide was done, you know, earlier in the week. We actually have updated numbers as of Tuesday night. Unfortunately, California now has 25% of the nation's homeless population, so really disproportionate share of those who are homeless. A 14% increase from just a year ago, and the numbers that have come out this week in HUD's annual homeless assessment report. And there's a lot of, I think we can all suggest a number of reasons why, but there's a real direct correlation to housing affordability and lack of supply in these numbers. The areas of the country that have seen similar numbers to the preceding slides have seen very similar increases, and particularly in the West Coast, where there's in coastal communities, there's very high correlation to lack of housing affordability. This is a chart, and hopefully you can see it. And it's really about where our jobs are versus where our housing is, right? So the jobs housing balance is a little bit out of whack. We have in our high job centers not as much housing availability, more housing availability where there aren't jobs, and so obviously there's a lot of ways we've tried to address these through economic incentives and other land use policy, but you'll see reflected in a lot of the thought process behind the package of bills that was passed, trying to better line up where jobs are and where housing can be built or created. The legislative package, we're just signed into law at the end of September. It does a number of things, right? Chris mentioned it has a significant funding aspect to it. It also has several bills that deal with kind of streamlining approvals for housing and other various land use actions. So it provides a little bit of tightening up and greater enforcement of things like the Housing Accountability Act, provides some authority to us at the state to utilize the Attorney General's office to enforce some of those existing housing laws, and also deals with our real need to preserve the affordable homes that we do have, which of course is very important and sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. Is we can keep building and putting resources in it, but if we're losing homes that were affordable for various reasons, we're kind of just pushing that boulder up the hill and having it fall back on us. And so there's a combination of things. I know we're going to focus heavily on funding today, so I'm going to go through some of the other measures just very, very quickly, and then focus most of my comments on the funding opportunities coming. So AB 1397 deals with land zones for housing can accommodate new development. It's a stronger justification that needs to be used at the local level when non-vacant sites are used to meet your projected housing needs. We expect to offer some technical assistance on this in the coming year, in the coming spring. And I should have said at the front, we do expect, hopefully this month, to be putting out a timeline for all of these measures on our website. Just yesterday, our communications unit sent out, we have a specific web page on our website for the legislative housing package. There's summaries of the bills there. Their forthcoming will be kind of a timeline, which we'll go through some of those things today, when you can expect things like notice of funding availability, guidelines, technical assistance memos, those sorts of things on all the bills, as well as frequently asked questions. So we've obviously been getting a lot of questions already, and we hope before these bills go into law on January 1st that they'll be up on our website this month. And those will be continually updated as we get questions. Most of the questions so far are focused on a lot of what we're going to talk today. Hey, when's money coming? When can we expect resources? Those sorts of things. But there are a lot of questions on some of the land use measures as well. And so there'll be a lot more detail that can be sought after there. There is a web address too you can send questions to on that website. I'm hoping I get it right. It's lhp@hcd.ca.gov. So SB 35 got a lot of attention and press. It deals with streamlined approval processes, and I'm not going to go heavily into this, but if there are questions, I don't want to step on next week's webinar too much. But we will certainly. This is one where we have received a lot of questions on. We will have a lot of those frequently asked questions up this month, and then beginning January 1 when the law goes into effect, we will have kind of that preliminary eligibility posted on our website of which communities this applies to and which it does not. So stay tuned for that. As I mentioned, there's several bills that deal with amendments to the Housing Accountability Act. We'll be providing technical assistance on these bills later in the year. We have had to kind of triage, when the things we focus on first. And to no surprise, some of the bigger measures around funding, making sure those funds can be deployed quickly, as well as some of the new kind of land use provisions and how that affects local jurisdictions we're prioritizing first, but we're of course happy to answer questions as they come through our website. And increased enforcement for state housing laws is AB 72, goes into effect on January 1. So this allows us to, in the most egregious cases, refer cases to the Attorney General for violations of the Housing Accountability Act. So thanks for your patience in getting to the real meat of what we want to talk about. SB2 and 3 are the major funding bills in the package. So SB2 creates a permanent and ongoing source of revenue flowing into the state, many of which then get redistributed down to the local governments in future years. SB3 is a bond, the general obligation bond, placed on the ballot in November 2018, a $4 billion measure, $3 billion of which goes to programs that we administer at HCD for affordable housing, and another $1 billion that goes to the California Department of Veterans Affairs to fund their veterans home ownership kind of program. So we'll be talking about the $3 billion that comes to HCD for a variety of affordable housing programs today. So SB2 it's funded by a document recording fee on real estate transactions, excluding those transactions related to home sales. So the estimates, this is a source that can vary over time, but the estimates are we should expect about $250 million a year. In the bill, it has some different provisions on how the first year of revenues get spent and how the revenues get spent beyond that. So in year one, so in the calendar year beginning January 1, 2018 through the end of 2018, all those revenues collected will be split 50-50 between planning grants that will be available to go out to local governments to assist with planning activities that help further the production of new housing, and the other half will go to addressing homelessness, so that we will be able to award out to communities. So those funds haven't begun to accumulate yet. They will begin accumulating, like I said, in January 1st. And just to hopefully get to some of your questions kind of early, the interesting part about that is our budget year at the state does not flow on the calendar year. So we would expect our first appropriation of these funds to come in the state budget that will pass in June 2018. We don't yet know if that will be 1 quarter's worth of funding, 2 quarters worth of funding, if there'll be a forecast beyond. We do know we expect some funding in that first year, and then we will be able to begin to deploy that after that. This coming fall, we can begin on both the sources. But we do expect even these year one funding kind of probably come to us in 2 rounds. So this June in the state budget, and next June 2019, the remainder. So, but once we have those funds, regardless, we will have guidelines on both of these points. The planning grants will be able to provide technical assistance with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research to local governments about how to be ready to kind of spend those planning dollars. We may be able to get some of those planning dollars out, certainly the technical assistance out once the budget is passed and those funds are appropriated. And on the homelessness side, we will hope to be able to deploy those funds as quick as possible after appropriate, hopefully with a notice of fund availability out in the fall of next year. All this, of course, I should caveat, subject to change because we're relying on the appropriation process. We are, of course, planning on doing public outreach in the first half of 2018 on both of these pieces too. So stay tuned. There should be a number of opportunities, and we're looking forward to working very closely with CSAC to help provide those to you all. But that process will also be like, hey, what are the best use of how we should spend those planning dollars? How we should spend those homeless dollars? Eligible uses, eligible applicants, that sort of thing. We certainly have some ideas, but there'll be an outreach process so everyone else can weigh in on that. So we'll hopefully have guidelines ready and ready for kind of public consumption in the middle of the year, so that if we are appropriated funds, as we expect, we can then begin to deploy them as quick as possible in the latter half of 2018. In year 2 and beyond, so beginning in 2019, the revenues that flow from this new fee then get divvied up a different way. 70% of the funds go directly to local governments using the Community Development Block Grant formula, and that's stipulated in the bill. It actually says it's using the formula as it was in 2017. So I expect in our frequently asked questions we can kind of post what that would look like, but so like the percentage you got if you were in entitlement jurisdiction in the 2017 Community Development Block Grant formula would be kind of at least close, if not exact, to the percentage you could expect on whatever the funds are coming from here. So 70% of those funds flow out to local governments. The remaining 30% does stay at the state for a variety of programs. 10% is at HCD for farm worker housing programs. 5% goes to HCD of those funds for incentive-based programs, so incentive to build housing type of programs. And the remaining 50% goes to our sister agency, the California Housing Finance Agency, to deal with basically the missing middle kind of questions, right? So folks who, serving income levels maybe above where we typically serve, above 60 or 80%, up to kind of 150% of area median income. So higher income folks, but folks who are certainly still getting squeezed out of the marketplace. So as I was mentioning, the fees get collected. We would hopefully have guidelines out by the middle of the year, and then if all things go well in the appropriation process, can begin to push out the first round of those fundings towards the latter half of the year. Awards could lag a little bit depending upon when those things go out and when we're able to get things out, but towards the end of the year or beginning of 2019 is when the actual awards could get made following that notice of funding availability. So SB3 is the bond on the ballot in November. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the programs that our previous housing bonds have funded. We have not had a housing bond on the state ballot since 2006 when we passed Prop 1C. A couple years before that, we passed Prop 46. So all of those funds from previous bonds have been depleted. And SB3 essentially refills the coffers of most of those programs that have been in existence and kind of working really well for developers and communities to provide, for the most part, affordable rental housing, some homeownership opportunities as well. So that is split. Half of those funds go to basically our flagship kind of multifamily housing program. There are elements of that can get down into permit supportive housing, other kind of housing, but multifamily housing in a general sense, which folks may refer to as MHP. Half of those funds flow for that purpose, which is generally speaking, keeping homes affordable and building homes to serve all California's needs. $500 million goes into our transit-oriented development and infill infrastructure programs, and so those are a little more narrowly directed, right? So tying affordable housing production close to transit, providing for the infrastructure related to the production of housing. So those are programs that were initially funded in Prop 1C in 2006, and it refills those coffers there. $400 million for the Cal Home program, which is certainly a little more flexible, can get into home ownership and some other things. It's actually even a source now that can help provide disaster relief and other things. $300 million goes to the Joe Cerna farm worker housing program. So in addition to the SB2 revenues that will flow into farm worker housing needs, this is a program that typically meets the needs of agricultural workers and their families. And then $300 million goes into a local housing trust fund matching grant program that was also created in the past. So this allows us to match investments made at the local level into local housing trust funds to get more money locally as well. And as I mentioned, the remaining $1 billion of the $4 billion bond measure goes to CalVet for veterans' home ownership programs that they administer. So that goes on the ballot in 2018. Obviously, voters need to approve this. We certainly hope they do. If voters approve it, we'd expect to be able to get our first notice of funding availability out in the spring of 2019. So we could turn this around pretty quick with our first, since these are programs we have administered in the past and are comfortable doing so. We can turn this around very quickly, and would expect the first one to come out in the beginning of 2019, and then subsequent NOFAs throughout the year for those programs in the bond funds. So, this is, I skipped over this in the interest of time, leaving for questions, but, we have, we try to tell a story, how does this help families, right, this package? Ideally, the land use provisions, which, are maybe out of sight to most people, are getting more sites available for housing, are getting more, a little bit easier to approve and build housing. The funding, of course, comes in to help subsidize and fast track and pay for that housing. And of course, the strength and accountability measures allow us to, fix things where maybe things are going wrong. And so, I think we're talking about tens of thousands of households we'll be able to fund with our funding programs. over the life of this, and we're certainly excited to be able to help with those investments. We have a number of tools. I mentioned that we have a specific web page now, just dedicated legislative housing package. So you can direct questions through that email address on that web page. You can certainly sign up on our listservs for updates and announcements. I'm certainly not gonna try to cannibalize all the folks here working through CSAC, but there are a lot. We will be hiring quite significantly too. So if you know folks who are looking for jobs in the planning or land use or affordable housing or housing worlds, we will be hiring quite a few folks to accommodate the growth of resources that we have to put out at HCD as well, beginning that in the middle of next year. And right now we are just trying to plug along and deal with as much as we can, as soon as we can, be as responsive as we can. Really happy to work with CSAC here to get your questions answered as quickly as possible. Hopefully working on doing some outreach very quickly come 2018 to hear from all Californians, all constituencies, like how we can best take advantage of the package that was passed. And so I know there's probably many questions, so I'm happy to sit here with Chris and answer them. And thank you for the time and your interest.
Great. And so we did want this to be as interactive as possible. That's why we have about 35 minutes here reserved for questions at the end. And so I'm not seeing questions on my screen, but I can start off with a few that I imagine have probably come up already. So Zach, you mentioned for SB2 that the 70% of funding that's going to be allocated to local governments in year 2 and in future years of the bill is going to be allocated based on the CDBG formula to entitlement jurisdictions. So there's a couple dozen counties that are not entitled, they're non-entitlement jurisdictions. So what is the availability of funding for those jurisdictions?
Yeah, this is where it gets a little bit into the complex in the way the bill is structured, but a percentage of those funds are available on a competitive basis for non-entitlement. Well, I should say some of those funds in the CDBG formula, right? I believe it's about 7% in the 2017 CDBG formula, then are kind of siphoned off with that formula for us to award to non-entitlement jurisdictions. And so I think that equates, say we had $250 million, that would be around $12 million a year that we'd be able to push out to non-entitlement jurisdictions. The bill also provides within a competitive kind of a small percentage of that 70% as well to go out competitively to non-entitlement jurisdictions. So it's kind of two bites of the apple. There is some funds that we'll be deploying out to non-entitlement jurisdictions based on that CDBG formula that are retained for those purposes, and then an additional, and remember this is annual, so additional annual amount available on a competitive basis. So we don't necessarily know the amounts there, but like I said, if it was based on a $250 million annual revenue, we would have, anywhere from probably $10 to $15 million to put out to non-entitlement jurisdictions.
There were definitely some questions about entitlement and non-entitlement jurisdiction, so thank you for that. A couple of people are asking if the presentation is going to be available. We will make it available on our website after this presentation and make sure that the attendees of the webinar have a link to where that will be. There's another question here. One county receives entitlement CDBG funds for their unincorporated area of the county as well as for their consortium cities. Will they receive the SB2 funds for these consortium cities as well?
So it's just, it's just the CDBG formula. So if that was a jurisdiction that was receiving funds directly in CDBG, it'd be the same kind of designation. And so I hope in our frequently asked questions, I think that is our plan to post what those percentages were for all the awardees in the 2017 CBG award time. And so if they were a direct recipient in that, yes, they would continue to get that receipt. I think it does lead to maybe an interesting question, right? We will see, based on this revenue, based on the formula, we'll see a number of small jurisdictions that are entitlement get not too much money, right? And so I think it is something I would encourage counties especially to think about is, hey, to the degree there could be memorandums of understanding of pooling some of those funds, you might be able to get more bang for your buck, right, in a regional or county level. because you might have a number of small cities within a county getting $100,000, a couple $100,000, that sort of thing. And so I do think, there's a lot of folks beginning to think about as they look at this, hey, how can we best utilize those resources? The nice part about these revenues from SB2 as opposed to SB3 is they are much more flexible. SB3 dollars are for just bricks and mortar construction uses. We do have a lot more flexibility in the funds that come in from SB2, so you can serve everything from homelessness up to home ownership. You can pay for rental assistance, those sorts of things. So the money can certainly be spent in a good way, no matter if the funds are pooled or not. But I do know I've heard some initial discussions about, hey, what if we were to pool our funds with other nearby cities, nearby counties, and think creatively around, hey, as we're getting annual allocations in to each of us, trying to maximize that money coming in to serve the regional needs. So that's something to think about.
So could you elaborate on SB2 CDBG entitlement formula? Is it the CDBG funds coming into the state totaled and then county share of the total? It's
unrelated to CDBG at all, except for the formula, right? So it's not going to change or any of the funds coming to the communities for CDBG. It just is using that same formula. So we do not set that formula, of course, and it actually locks it in at what the formula was in 2017 in the legislation and the statute as currently passed. And so, that's why I said, for example, the non-entitlement share of that would flow for us to be able to get out to the non-entitlement jurisdiction, I believe, is around 7%. It's depending upon your county, depending upon your city. There are percentages that we can certainly share with folks that are frequently asked questions. So you could kind of do that factor yourself, right? Hey, our county is getting 1%, so we don't know how much money it's going to be, but say it was $100 million, we get 1% of $100 million. Because like I said, this funding source is volatile. And then once we do the calculation of 70%, we do that calculation and say, hey, okay, 1% of this $200 million of our share is so you can at least begin to prepare a little bit based on the revenue projections.
Would the 10 to 15 million of the 70% for non-entitlement jurisdictions be awarded by formula or by a competitive NOFA issued by
There's
HCD?
Two pieces. There's one where we are asked to award it kind of to each and every non-entitlement jurisdiction, and then there's also a competitive piece beyond that for the non-entitlement jurisdictions.
And the non-entitlement jurisdictions, are they the only entities eligible for that, or are they prioritized, I think, is how it might have been written?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So how will the state handle cities adding or dropping from CDBG consortiums?
So the statute says it's the 2017 formula. So there could be some interpretation, or I certainly desire to further clarify that, but I would interpret that it be locked in on what was in the 2017, the cities there. Now, we can only apply the statute as written, right? So I know there's a lot, I've heard folks be interested in saying, oh, hey, that may need some clarification, but we can only apply it as it currently is, and so that says it's the 2017 formula, it's those cities and counties, and those percentages. So barring any changes, I would expect it to be the same kind of cities and counties moving forward.
Will there be minimum funds set aside for small counties?
Well, since it's on the formula basis, it's whatever that formula would be. We do have some, I think, choices to make in terms of the non-entitlement awards and how we deal with some of that competition. I will be candid. We've been much more focused so far on the year one funds, right? Because those come out first, and so we will also, I should mention, have guidelines that stipulate this in much more detail on those kind of year two and beyond pieces for local governments. So, for example, even though there's an expectation that goes on in that formula, there are also rules, certainly in being compliant with your housing element and some other things, and so that could affect. That's why I say be careful. That could affect a little bit, right? If there were some communities that dropped out of that kind of formula because they were not eligible for the funds because they were not compliant with state law for various reasons, then it would create. So we'll have to deal, the legislation doesn't say how to deal with those sorts of situations. And so our guidelines will have to get into kind of the details, which we're certainly getting into questions. And so I'm certainly happy, I'm providing my thoughts, but I want to be clear that folks will be able to weigh in on the right mechanisms to deal with some of those questions when we get to guidelines for year 2.
And so the best way to be aware of those guidelines updates would be going to the Legislative Housing Package website and signing up for email updates there?
Absolutely. And, like I said, because those funds don't even begin to accumulate for that local share until 2019, not that we don't want those funds immediately, but we do have some time, of course, to make sure we get this right from a guidelines perspective, capture all your questions, make sure we're dealing appropriately with them all. So even though we probably don't have answers to everything today, we do have some time, and we'll start that kind of process for, we're certainly starting now for the planning grant and homelessness pieces, but we'll begin that process for the year 2 and beyond stuff for SP2 in 2018 as well.
And will updates on those, 2018 calendar year programs be going through the same subscription service? And
we will have, like I said, if you just want to go and check on our webpage, we have that legislative housing package webpage, and we will have up, hopefully this month, it's just in the review of the governor's office right now, a timeline for each and every bill and what can be expected, right? So, for example, on SP2, here, in the spring, there'll be outreach sessions. In the summer, there'll be the draft guidelines developed, and then the first notice of availability, hopefully out in the fall, that kind of thing. For other bills, which aren't funding related, hey, a technical assistance memo is targeted for this, this time of year, that sort of thing. So give a little bit more, hopefully, clarification to folks on, when you can expect. And of course, if you have questions, we are there, and we have that webpage to begin to answer them. We are can go above and beyond that, especially on the planning side, when we have some of the resources from SB2 actually dedicated towards technical assistance to communities to help them from a planning perspective for the planning grants. And so, we're here to kind of make this thing go as smoothly as possible.
And so, speaking of the outreach, you have the email list. You'll be putting out letters or guidance. Can you talk more about what the outreach will look like, or is there going to be more reaching out that you're going to do?
Yeah, and I hope we can do it actually in collaboration with CSAC as well. I think we would do kind of public workshops, public forums, where we kind of come with some of the policy questions and say, hey, please give us your thoughts on that, or please react to these draft guidelines, right, before we finalize them, please provide public comment. So we have, for example, on draft guidelines, we would have workshops, and we'd have a public comment period, right, and that sort of thing. But even before that, I think in the early part of the year, before we even write those draft guidelines, we're trying to work with as many stakeholders as possible to hear from them, whether they be in kind of just interviews with key stakeholders or even small convened forums and meetings. And that is where I think CSAC is hopeful to partner with CSAC to provide some of those opportunities on the host of the package and feedback that we need, right? So we know that local governments especially have a lot to deal with this package, not just the funding stuff that we talked about, but we're talking about a lot today, but even the other land use provisions and accountability and kind of streamlining provisions. And so we want to provide a number of forums to do that, and to the degree we can combine these things with both stakeholders, but also by topic area, we'll hope to do that. And so I'm hopeful that we'll begin even to have some of those come January. And so we would publicize those certainly through our listserv, through our webpage, through hopefully our partners like CSAC would also put out those communications like, hey, there's a these workshops are available, these forums are available, please join us. So I would look out for information like that through all those forums.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that you were focusing more on the year 1 funds. Are they going to be distributed competitively or by formula for the SB2 funds specifically? Well,
that is one of the key policy questions, right? So, the caveat here is we obviously want to speak with folks and hear from them. I do expect that there'll be, I'll talk about one at a time. On the planning grant side, our expectation is that any community that wants planning dollars can obtain them. That's one of the reasons we're offering technical assistance. The hard part to answer there is how much will be available. We just don't know because we don't know what the revenue is going to be yet. So that's this tough place that we're in. So I do expect because of that unknown, we'll probably try to front load the technical assistance dollars up front, and probably plan on awarding those planning assistance dollars over the course, like I said, of 2 years. And our sense on that is that it would be available to each and every jurisdiction that wants it, but there may be abilities to get more if there are certain things that counties or the counties or cities are doing. We're certainly open to that. We also are open to knowing that we're maybe not going to get all the funds up front, but there may be some communities that are in high need. So, for example, are we thinking about piloting some of those grants early to maybe disaster-affected communities or other really needy communities that are identified in some way? We're certainly open to that. So that'd be another thing we'd want feedback on. And so that's on the planning grant side. On the homelessness side, I do expect, while we have not landed on a situation, landed it anywhere yet, given that we haven't gone the public process yet, I do expect they'll be competitive, just because there's not a lot of money once you get to 50% of the year one revenues. I should have mentioned, we don't know, but I think it's likely that maybe the year one revenues will be less than future years, just because it's brand new, and they're, counties especially are getting, having developed the process for how to collect that fee, and there can be subtracted, some of the administrative cost of that. So it could be a lower amount in the first year than we might see in subsequent years. We just don't know. So say it was $200 million for that calendar year, we'd only have $100 million to put out for homelessness. So, given the challenges of formulas and those sorts of things, I expect we will do it competitively, but it's certainly an area that we'll go out for feedback on, because it's kind of the same kind of challenge, right? If you having a couple $100,000 here and there is a lot harder to really invest in some of the needs that might be there around homelessness. So that's my gut where we'll land, but certainly open to suggestions.
Will you have an idea of how much funding is coming in while you're in the guideline development process? Will you be starting to get feedback in terms of what's being collected?
We won't know the first. So the payments are remitted quarterly to the controller's office. We don't deal with the funding or the fee collection at HCD, and it lags 30 days for that reporting. So the first quarter funds of 2018, we will know what those amounts are by the end of April. So that's really, in terms of, that's one of the unknowns, right? When you think about the legislative budget process, they may only know, or should probably only know 1 quarter's worth of funding at that point. And so we just don't know how they're going to deal with that, how that information is going to be dealt with. Would you say, okay, yeah, that's the quarter, you get 1 quarter's worth, and we'll give you the next 3 next year? Would you do 2 quarters worth? Would you kind of forecast? I think that's obviously out of our control and subject to the legislative budget process. But so that's when the controllers will be the ones remaining those funds. So we'll know basically a month after each quarter. So we'll know at the end of April, at the end of July, at the end of, what would that be, October, and then again the following January.
And I should mention, this is probably a crowd that's more focused on the planning and housing and homelessness side of things, but CSAC is working with the County Recorders Association and with our County Councils Association on addressing some of the questions that are coming up related to the actual implementation of the fiscal mechanism here, which is the collection of that recording fee at the county level. So we will be coming out with resources and guidance on that to the extent we're developing that in consultation with the recorders and the attorneys.
So if Congress's HR1 tax bill passes as it currently is written, will you be making any changes to the CDBG formula for SP2?
No, it's the bill, or the statute given to us says it's the 2017 formula. So we would not at HCD make any changes. If there was a change in the legislation, we would have to accommodate that, or in the statute based on a legislative change at the state level. So in some ways that's locked in.
So if they want to find their CDBG share for entitlement jurisdictions, where can they find that?
Yeah, I hope that we will have that out this month with accompanying our frequently asked questions. It is kind of challenging to find if you try to go through HUD's website, and you're certainly welcome to go look at previous allocations through HUD's website. I would caution as you kind of do that, because when they are looking at the national awards there's sometimes some adjustments they make based on a variety of remittances back or those sorts of things, but it can give you a sense, right? Hey, we got this much based on this amount nationally that goes. We do have the percentages, I think, that were given to us that I'm hoping we can publish very soon.
So what is the best source of funds for housing development infrastructure and land use feasibility studies for implementation funding, perhaps under SB3? This is both for entitlement and non-entitlement jurisdictions.
So is the question, how do you kind of plan for...
What's the best source of funds for infrastructure and land use feasibility studies?
For the studies.
So maybe under SB3?
Yes, so I mean, certainly within SB2 and those funds, especially ones that come to you locally, one, we have some planning dollars out there, right? So it's possible, depending upon, I don't want to commit fully, but because I don't know the specifics of that. But I think the way we envision those planning dollars is, hey, get your plans up to speed, whatever they may be, that there can be a connection back to, hey, by doing this plan update or this planning process, it leads to more housing, right? So does that get down to the specific study level? Maybe not. But as you get into the funds you get locally, there are kind of, like I said, they're pretty flexible and broad. So, I mean, to the degree you want to fund a pre-development cost, right, in affordable housing, I think that could be possible, and the pre-development cost could be kind of the studies that are necessary in order to build that development. So, I would envision that to be potentially possible.
Is there any difference there between the entitlement and non-entitlement counties?
No, I mean, the eligible uses will be the eligible uses for all of the SP2 funds.
Well, that is all the questions that we have, so thank you.